A common challenge of the competent but otherwise bored Factorio player is the construction of a megabase. Mega being a metric prefix signifying million, and base in reference to your factory. The objective of a megabase then is to make a factory which produces 1 million science per minute, which, what's that? It's usually 1000 science per minute. Surely that's a kilo base. Well, that's not going to do. So in this trilogy of videos, I'm going to make a real, mega as in million, megabase. Beginning in this video with making a conventional 1000 science per minute kilo base of the star system to kick us off on the right foot. Since the Forge World aesthetic is just far too good to pass up on, I'm using the Any Planet Start mod to begin this run on the geoactive hellhole of Vulcanus. Almost immediately, I'm on fire, which is a good start. Since there are no resource patches for iron, copper or stone on Vulcanus, I have to mine rocks to get them, as well as a bit of bonus tungsten, which I can't mine from the patch until later on. I set up shop on this little coal patch, which I could barely see as it blends into the ashy flatlands near seamlessly. Unlike Nauvis, Vulcanus rocks don't drop any coal, so I'm forced to mine it by hand from the patch, like a peasant. Due to the Any Planet Start mod, I don't need to research steel, since it's required for us to get power in the first place, before we can do any research. I've started producing it right away, not because I need it for anything specific in this moment, but because producing 50 of it unlocks the steel axe technology, which lets us mine faster. And when our only source of iron and copper is mining rocks right now, that's a significant upgrade. Before I can make any more progress, I'm going to need calcite, so I'm placing down a little burner mine setup on a nearby patch. Smelting 5 steel also unlocked solar panels, so I can use one to power this sulfuric acid pump jack, unlocking basic coal liquefaction, but before I can do anything with that, I'm going to need to do some research, so I place down a lab. That chemical plant is set to the incredibly powerful acid neutralization recipe, the cheap and plentiful steam of which will solve all of my power wars once I've researched steam power. Once that's done, I can place down some steam engines so we can use electricity not just during the day. I've also placed down an oil refinery to turn calcite, coal and sulfuric acid into heavy oil using that basic coal liquefaction recipe I mentioned earlier, which we need for lubricant to make this planet's unique building, the Foundry. Foundries are excellent because they can process the plentiful lava surrounding us into an unlimited source of iron, copper and stone, as well as having a 50% productivity boost. Paired with the fact we can use foundries to craft more foundries, we now get a free foundry for every 2 foundries we make. To facilitate the continued crafting of these machines, I have a little hand-fed reinforced concrete build and a little tungsten carbide build, but the circuits I still need to craft by hand for the moment. Once a few foundries have crafted, I can place them down by this lava lake here to start putting some automation into my automation game, with a single foundry each turning lava into molten iron or copper. I'm going to hand feed the calcite for now, since by the time we're using enough to require a serious amount, I would hope I would have moved on to a bigger and better build. As in any good factory, my next step is automating iron gears and green circuits, before turning some of them into inserters and transport belts to help speed up construction and serve as ingredients for green science. I'm taking advantage of Foundry's ability to craft belts to get an extra 50% belts for the same amount of resources. The crash site is preventing the factory from growing, punishable by death. So I deconstruct it and put 60 science per minute of red and green science in its wake. It would be 60 science per minute of green science, anyway, if I'd researched it yet. As we place more and more power-hungry foundries, the horrible steam power plant is slowly metastasizing, but it's, temporary, so that's alright. More steam consumption stretched the single sulfuric acid geyser beyond its means, and the power's arse fell out, so I should probably get some more. Using the ability to disconnect power poles using the copper wire tool, I placed these solar panels to just power some pump jacks and a single acid neutralization plant, so that even if the main power grid fails, these will still make a trickle of steam. No point waiting around then, it's time to get straight into blue science. Engine units are super easy since we can produce limitless steel from nothing but a bit of calcite and lava. For some reason I turned iron plates into gears and pipes instead of directly casting them from molten iron, but in my defence I'm mostly used to making my blue science on Nauvis, where that isn't an option till quite late in the game. I'm then turning sulfuric acid into steam into water, and into heavy oil into light oil into petroleum, and then combining that into sulfur, which is so nearly cyclical it almost feels pointless, before making this quite large build just to support 2 plastic plants for the red circuits. Turning the plastic into red circuits, we are now producing blue science, which is where the game really starts to open up a lot. Because I breathe and have a pulse, I really want robots, which begins of course with electric engines. After a quick meander setting up more molten metal production and red ammo, I set up the very beginning of a mall and decide to go take on a demolisher. It goes, not unpredictably, very badly, with my bare minimum damage research pre-military science. Okay, so military science it is, which I've stuck on top of the other sciences like some sort of parasitic worm. I'm not quite as methodical with my placement this time, and utilising the even distribution mod, it's quite easy to distribute my old bag of ammo. The big lumbering coward is running away, so I pop a few rounds into his back and do a lot of definitely not running away back into the range of my turrets. It's looking pretty touch and go as he worms his way through my clump of turrets, but ultimately, the lead outside burns brighter than the tungsten within, and the lava leviathan falls. Clearly inebriated by this victory, I place down another clump of turrets in a territory to the north, just in waiting for the wormy to swing by and get his shit rocked. So, remember when I was meant to be making bots? Yeah, me neither. So I start setting up carbon for tungsten carbide, as simple as combining some of that coal we're mining with sulfuric acid. It's when I'm laying pipe for this that territory's worm meets our clump of turrets and wins decisively. I was worried for a moment that the fucker was going to come straight over here and start ripping into my base, which would have led to a thoroughly defenestrated computer, but fortunately he goes back to his business. Anyway, so if I combine that carbon with tungsten and yet more sulfuric acid, I've got tungsten carbide fully automated. I then automate refined concrete, which allows me to now fully automate foundries. And if I drag those electric engines and some red circuits over here, I can also automate big mining drills. That worm territory is genuinely in the way of my continued expansion, so I try again to kill the thing, and yet again, fail. Third tries the charm, however, and I managed to eliminate it without even losing that many turrets. Immediately I set up belt automation in its old home, as well as automated steam engines since my power grid is struggling. After setting up a new, much higher capacity steam production area, I begin my first massive array of steam engines. The steam created in the chemical plants is 500 degrees Celsius, whereas the maximum the steam engines can efficiently use is 165 degrees, meaning we're wasting a lot of the energy stored in that steam. Steam turbines would be much more effective, but we can't unlock those until we either go to Gleba and mine a copper stromatolite, or Nauvis and mine uranium, so we're stuck with the engines for now. Now that power is a bit less of a problem, I can start producing the upgraded red belts, with double the throughput of those crappy yellow belts. Also, I remembered I needed circuits for these splitters, so you can stop shouting at the screen now. At this point, I'm hunting worms for sport. I actually completely forgot to show myself building this tungsten mine before, so here's me expanding it a bit. It's from the territory of that first worm that I killed. Daily reminder to check that you're limiting your chests. At least it's basically free, thanks to coming from lava. Remember when I said I was setting up bots? Yeah, I'm actually doing it this time, starting with batteries. Batteries are stupidly easy on this planet, since most of the effort is from making the sulfuric acid, and copper and iron are basically free here. For the pedants, yes, metals aren't technically free, they cost calcite, but I can tell you from my hindsight writing this script later on, that even 50 hours into the run, I'm only on my second calcite patch, and this planet gets pretty fucking big. Once the batteries and electric engines are done, completing the flying robot frames is easy. I place the assemblers for construction and logistics bots, feeding into a chest which feeds into a robot part, for which I use a circuit condition to only fill the network up to a certain level of each, and just like that, the game has opened up. My first step is of course getting some modular armour with robot parts. Due to the short day-night cycle of Vulcanus, combined with its massive solar power boost, portable solar panels are very powerful. With an army of bots behind me, it's time to get some real work done, starting with this build which makes a full red belt of green circuits from just the molten metals. Then, just to be safe, I made another one. Before I move on to red circuits, I want the better coal liquefaction recipe, unlocked using this planet's science pack. That starts with making tungsten plate from a combination of tungsten ore and molten iron. Then, combining that with tungsten carbide and molten copper in a foundry gets us the metallurgical science pack, and after routing that messily into the labs, I can start to research the real coal liquefaction recipe. Coal liquefaction requires some heavy oil to kickstart, so I have to use a simple recipe I had before to get that, but then by combining the heavy oil with coal and steam, I get all three primary oils, with some of the heavy oil then needing to be looped back into the start of the process. Once the process starts, it's going to very quickly clog up with the heavy oil which it mainly produces, so I have to use oil cracking to turn it into light oil, and any excess light oil into petroleum, which is mainly what we want. Unlike with advanced oil processing from Nauvis, where you need a lot more light oil cracking than heavy oil, it's almost the other way around with coal liquefaction. Oil cracking costs a lot of water, which we can only get from condensing steam, so I put alarms on the steam and sulfuric acid tanks to warn me if I'm over-consuming and need to set up more production. With this new better oil setup, I can now start producing a massive amount of plastic, along with a bit of sulfur, which I turn into explosives and then the cliff explosives, which I have just finished researching. Most of that plastic goes into red circuits, which thanks to the ridiculous 1:24 ratio of copper wire foundry to red circuit assembler, is quite literally too big to fit on the screen all at once. To make my life easier fighting demolishers and getting to other planets with more damage upgrades, and also admittedly because I'd forgotten robot logistics had been moved to space science, I start to set up yellow science. Obviously, we already have the flying robot frames needed, but before I can set up any of the other ingredients, that steam alarm I set up goes off. Shit. Checking the chemical plants, it turns out it's because of a lack of sulfuric acid, so I run over to tap the last, 2 geysers on the starter acid patch. That's going to do about as much good as a fire extinguisher in a blast furnace, so I think it's time to go out and find a new patch. I do end up finding one out in the boonies, but it's halfway into a demolisher territory, so I lay down my bear trap, along with my bait in the form of a nice tasty mining outpost. The greedy bastard never stood a chance. With my steam supply freshly renewed, I set up blue circuits in low density structure, the last 2 ingredients for yellow science. LDS has a nice recipe in the foundry which is made from the 2 molten metals and plastic, and of course benefits from the productivity bonus of the foundry. It's only now I realise that it's space science I want for robot logistics, prompting me to set up rocket fuel and route overflow blue circuits and LDS over to the north here, where I'm planning my rocket silo array. I placed down the first silo over here with no productivity modules, totally because I'm cool and quirky and ungovernable, and not because I forgot. The threat of actually producing something, however, caused my piddly little starter coal patch to shrivel up like a grape in the sun. So before I can get into the fun, spacey bit of Space Age, I have to go stomp some more worms. I find a coal patch in another territory a bit further out than the one I just cleared, but it's so far from spawn that it's inhabited by a medium demolisher, and the stomper swiftly becomes the stompee, as my turrets quickly run out of ammo. Whilst I wait for more ammo to produce, I decided to set up Space Platform Foundation automation, since that doesn't use up any of our precious coal. When it comes to naming the space platforms, I'm incredibly unoriginal, so I'm going with cars again. This time, I'm starting with the Suzuki Alto. Alto meaning keep upright, so take that as you will. I plan out my initial space science production basically immediately, which even this little thing can support up to 60 science per minute, but with only a single silo, it's probably going to take a while to build. In case you don't know how space science works, or space in general in Space Age, the gist is that those asteroid collectors around the outside of a platform collect any little asteroid chunks flying past, which are deposited on the sushi belt, and those inserters on the top throw overboard any chunks that we have too much of. Then, the crushers turn the metallic, carbonic and oxide asteroids into iron ore, carbon and ice respectively, the iron ore needing to be smelted into plates to give us the 3 ingredients we need for space science. Whilst that platform very slowly builds, I have unfinished, wormy business far to the northeast. The worm seems to be far off on the other side of the territory, so I place down this mining drill, which I kind of assume attracts them. In the end, however, I go to find it myself and find him very happily minding his own business and not caring about the drill on his property. He does care about the bullets, however. To begin with, I wasn't sure if even this was enough, but it does do the job with scarily few turrets left. That worm did stand a chance. By now, Suzuki Keep Upright Alto is producing space science at full pelt. I did, however, forget to filter the input on the furnace to just take iron ore, so it can accidentally smelt steel, which I don't notice for a while. Here's where the coal comes in from those coal mines I forgot to record building, ready to be connected up when the current coal supply completely dries up. I, for some reason, put the landing pad on the complete opposite end of the factory from the labs, but the logistics of that is a later me problem, as I'm just moving it in bulk by hand until I get the few key researches I want. I'm in the middle of setting up purple science then, when I realise that rather than fit the square peg of 8+ science packs into the round hole of my tiny little 6 science lab setup by some sort of unearthly belt weaving abomination, I should instead just rip off a band-aid now and move on to a proper sushi science setup. So I do. Mostly, anyway. I don't actually have any footage of the completed build anywhere near this point in time. It was kind of set and forget. Professional video creator, people. Unlike a functional Factorio player, the only thing I pave in my factory is the bot mall. I don't really know why. Given this fact, it should be obvious what I'm building here. Of course, the first thing I automate is the tools to make more bot mall, and soon enough it's massive, ready to be filled with all the multitude of machines I'm going to need in my taking over of the star system. I'm at roughly the limit of what I can accomplish just sat here on Vulcanus, so it's about time I send up another space platform to make the traversal to another planet. This time, we're naming it Citron C1. I'm giving Citron C1 a pretty large cargo capacity, because my general plan to save time on the other planets is to just ship all the rocket ingredients and non-specific buildings from Vulcanus, ferrying it around on a big, fast space platform. I start off with my iron ore smelting, and I'm opting for foundries because it more than doubles the iron plates per ore we get, at only the cost of a bit of calcite which we can ship up from Vulcanus in bulk anyway. In retrospect, I definitely might have been going a bit overboard with the foundries. I could have survived on half this much. Feeding off the excess of foundries is an excess of magazine assemblers, and then of course this thing needs to move, so I get some engines set up. The biggest factor affecting speed is weirdly the width of the platform, so if you want your platform to be as fast as possible, you need to have as many engines as you can physically fit into a space the same size as the platform's widest point. This is why engine stacking is so effective, because you get more engines without adding the added width which usually comes with that. Engines need fuel and oxidizer to function, which are made by combining carbon or iron ore respectively with water. I settled for this design for asteroid crushing, which, full disclosure, is really, truly a terrible design which I regretted and botch solved with circuit conditions for a long time. This is because when crushing asteroids you get a small chance to get the asteroid itself back, which you should route back into the start of a process with priority so that it doesn't back up. But since I forgot to do this initially, my idea instead was to just try to pass the overflow between the two machines, with circuits to ensure that the new asteroid chunks aren't put into the system if the overflow hasn't been cleared. The problem is that there are just far too many edge cases in which this can back up. Plus, if the two sides are asymmetrically pulling resources, then it very easily backs up. Moral of the story, go with the simpler option and just route it back into the input. Okay, so whilst my poor space program slowly puts that platform together, it's time I aim my sights back down to Earth, Vulcanus. All this rocket production has strained my oil production massively, so I'm planning to extend my core liquefaction to an industrial scale. I end up with this pretty little module, which after supplying with one of those lines of coal I brought in, and a few barrels of heavy oil from the old setup to kickstart it, brings our oil production back to satisfactory levels. The long-handed inserters we are using can't actually move enough coal to keep up with maximum production, however, which I was going to first fix by using quality modules to gamble into possession of a few rare long-handed inserters, dumping the rest into lava, but ultimately decided to just cram another belt down the other side of the refineries, which makes the build not quite as satisfying. And, of course, I can't forget oil cracking. Back on Citron C1, I began construction of the, as I affectionately named it, Solar 5 head. Solar around Vulcanus, and our first planet of interest, is good enough that it probably didn't need to be as big as it is, but I have plans for this space later on, which necessitates a bit of wiggle room. Right at the very front of the platform, I made an asteroid sorting loop which takes in chunks from the asteroid collectors, and either drops them off onto a belt towards their respective crushers, or if there's too much of a given chunk type, sets its reprocessing recipe in these crushers to turn it into another type of asteroid we might not have as many of. Soon enough it's collected enough stray asteroids to get a bit of fuel in the engines, so to get the buffers filled and the ammo and fuel manufacturing running at full pelt, we're going to have to start moving. One of the quirks of using the Any Planet Start mod is that your home planet never has medium asteroids around it, which inadvertently made building Citron C1 easier than it should have been, but also, as just stated, made it quite a bit harder to get started up properly. By the time we're on the return trip, however, the platform is no longer starving and has made it up to a respectable speed of over 200 km per second. That wasn't with full buffers, however, and by its third trip, which I seem to have spent the entirety of debugging that god-awful crusher setup, it's cruising comfortably at 270 km per second, which is fast enough to get from planet to planet in under a minute. Now that we know it's functional, I get the platform loaded up with supplies, and myself, and jet off to the first planet I'm going to visit, which if you were paying attention to the travel progress bar when I was test flying, you will know is Nauvis. I touch down in the middle of a massive desert, and I am here for one very specific purpose: gathering uranium. Getting nuclear power now will make travelling to Fulgora, and working on Gleba, far easier, and will also likely be necessary for flying to the final planet Aquilo later on. Also, more importantly, I'm going to want to use Biolabs as soon as I unlock them, so I'm killing two birds with one stone by setting down my foothold now. The first thing I do is place down some iron and copper production, and a field of solar panels, so that I can craft a car to explore with, since I forgot to bring one with me. To the northeast I find an oil patch which I'll need for making sulfuric acid to mine the uranium, and to the northwest I find the patch itself, which has a modest 1.5 million ore, effectively over 3 million due to the resource drain multiplier of big mining drills, halving how much it takes for the same amount of ore. Once it's connected up to power, the act of mining a uranium ore researches uranium processing for us, and I immediately queue all of the uranium related researches that unlocks. I also enclose my mines with flamethrowers to deter any mega insectoid investigators. I replaced the electric furnaces with foundries relying on calcite imported from Vulcanus, because I want the ore patch to last as long as possible, and using centrifuges also imported from Vulcanus, I can start processing the uranium, hoping to get the 40 uranium-235 required to kickstart the Corvarex enrichment process. Back on Vulcanus for a second, that core liquefaction build still wasn't quite enough to keep up with demand, so I doubled it up, and began to reach roboports out towards the coal patch so I can remotely build more mines. Whilst on one hand I build out my primary perimeter on Nauvis, I build roboports along the coal belts on Vulcanus, swapping back and forth and planning one whilst I wait for the other to build. My supply of uranium-235 is closing in on the required 40, so I place down the centrifuges. I'm just going for a dumb design, which doesn't try to limit the number of 235 in the machine to a bare minimum of 40, so it'll take a bit longer than it perhaps should to start up, but once the buffers are filled up it'll be just as fast as any other Corvarex setup. I'm not going to produce any rocket ingredients on this planet, instead just importing them from Vulcanus, since the only thing I'll actually be sending up is the occasional pod of fuel cells for now. On Vulcanus, my vast roboport appendage has reached the coal patch, and I print down some more miners on a twin patch right next to it. Once the coal arrives, that's our oil shortage solved. Again. Until it's not. Again. Up on Citron C1, I'm doing that work on the Solar 5 head which I alluded to, beginning with hollowing it out. Ignore the fact that I placed the ammo belt backwards, I fix that later. Then, maybe predictably, I placed down 2 nuclear reactors into the gap. The fact is, it was never intended to be a solar ship. I just needed the panels until I reached Nauvis and started mining uranium. Because I forgot to actually make a route through the foundries for fuel cells, I ended up having them share a belt with calcite for a bit, and then split off and spaghetti through to the reactors. Despite it being slightly overkill, which has never stopped me before, I intend to make the full 160 megawatts of peak power available, which needs 16 heat exchangers and 28 steam turbines. Just as soon as it's been over to Nauvis to collect some fuel cells, I build the last of the steam turbines over some more solar panels, and with that, Citron C1 is ready for any inner star system challenge we can throw at it, including the cold, sandy, and solar challenged planet of Fulgora, whose door we are darkening next. It's to my immense disappointment to realise after landing that I haven't sent a landing pad with me on Citron C1, so whilst I send the platform back to grab one, I'm going to stay decently close to my initial landing site, since I'll need to trek back to get it once it's been sent down. Quite fortunately though, I found a Fulgoran vault ruin literally right next to my spawn island, so I can mine that to get the recycler research right away. During my exploration, I find this pretty huge island not too far to the northwest, so I decide that this can be the location of my Fulgoran base, once I've been back to collect the landing pad, of course. After I've set down the pad and given it the right logistics requests, my platform will automatically dump down everything we need to put the base together, including substations, accumulators, the ingredients to craft a rocket silo, big mining drills, and some belts to kickstart my initial scrap recycling setup. Recycling scrap gives us one of these items randomly, which themselves can be recycled into 25% of their ingredients. Everything I build on Fulgora has to be within range of one of these lightning collectors, which not only protects my buildings from being struck by lightning, but also discharges the lightning's power into the grid where it can be stored in the accumulators. For now, I just have this temporary setup for scrap sorting, where the resources get dumped into a loop and pulled off by inserters into provider chests. And of course the first thing I automate is more recyclers. In my initial playthrough of Space Age, I did try to use belts on Fulgora, but with the dozens of different items we'll soon be drowning in, and the near infinite scalability of bots once we get to infinite speed researches and quality robo parts, bots should be more than enough until we reach the MegaMegabase stage later on. Once I've placed so many recyclers that my little loop is struggling to keep up, I begin the process of producing Holmium, this planet's unique resource. Melting ice and then combining the water with stone and holmium ore gives us holmium solution, and then passing that into an assembly machine, or preferably a foundry, gives us holmium plates. The 50% productivity from foundries makes such a difference in early Fulgora that I'd almost call visiting Vulcanus a prerequisite for visiting Fulgora. And with that on top of something I'll talk about when we get to Gleba later, I'd almost be tempted to call Vulcanus, then Fulgora, then Gleba the canonical order to visit the 3 first planets in. The next step in my conquering of Fulgora is to start dealing with waste products. This can be done really easily using bots. We just make all these requester chests feeding onto belts into an array of recyclers, and set the requests of the chests based on any items in the network which we have more than a certain threshold of, in this case 2000. I then feed the products of this recycling into active provider chests, meaning bots will automatically come to take them into central storage, where the products themselves will then be subject to the threshold. Meanwhile, I set up refined concrete production, visible next to the landing pad there, and a much larger holmium solution production. I had OBS paused when I built my first electromagnetic plant, this planet's version of the Foundry, which makes electronics with a 50% productivity boost, but you can see 2 there making accumulators and more EM plants. I placed a tank and a pump before the holmium plate foundry because holmium solution is used a lot in this planet's science pack, and I don't want the science to be starved by just making loads of plates for other stuff. The first step in this planet's science pack is combining light oil, to craft which we pump up heavy oil from the oil sands between islands and crack with water, along with holmium, plastic and copper to make superconductor. We also need to make electrolyte by combining heavy oil, holmium solution and stone. Combining the electrolyte with green circuits, batteries, superconductor and holmium plate then gets us supercapacitors. Because my stupid skull has the attention span of a goldfish, I just need to quickly divert to note that I've set up green belts on Vulcanus in the middle of all this, which are a whole 4 times faster than yellow belts, by combining blue belts with tungsten plate and more lubricant. Anyway, as we were, combining supercapacitors with accumulators, electrolyte and holmium solution gives us the Electromagnetic science pack. In preparation for launching rockets to get this EM science back home, I set up rocket fuel. Blue circuits and LDS already come from scrap, so I don't need to worry about producing those. We will have more than enough. By now, I've got enough logistics bots imported from Vulcanus that I can just start dumping scrap recycling products straight into active provider chests and then letting the bot network sort them. Speaking of Vulcanus, I've set up a requester chest at the Sushi Science setup to place the new EM Science packs onto the belt, as well as adding the request in the landing pad and extending it with a few cargo bays, which not only increase its inventory size but also increase the speed at which pods can be dropped to the planet. The tiny scrap patch I started with is very quickly dwindling, so my next step is to use elevated rails to connect up to a larger scrap patch on another island. During the process I got killed by lightning, which I was most displeased about. I eventually arrived at this island, which you might recognise as the one I mined the vault ruin off. It has a patch containing a whopping 25 million scrap, a number so large that even if we were draining a flat 4 green belts of scrap off it, using big mining drills, it would still last 60 hours before any quality or productivity. This will do nicely. This is how it looks in the end. I know that I missed some efficiency modules out of those miners, and I would promise that I fix it later, but I quite literally never come back to this island, so I won't. I attached the input from this mine onto the existing belt of scrap, with priority for the old mine so that I can get rid of it quicker. You'll notice that I've graduated to using green belts. Not long after this, the first EM science arrives back on Vulcanus so that we can start researching lightning collectors, which I don't end up using for another 30 hours. Sometimes that's just how it goes. Next after that is Quality Module 3, since I've decided to start a quality farm here on Fulgora. The idea is simple. We have one building for each quality tier, put quality modules in each, and recycle any overflow with quality modules before routing the output back in at the start of a process. It's not fast, but it is effective, and I'm setting it up now so that when I really need good quality modules next video, TM, I've hopefully accumulated enough. I then copy this setup for quality 2 modules. Those combinators just check how much of each quality tier of item is in the chest, and if there's more than 50 of one, it feeds those to the recyclers. With me having done everything I need to do right now on Fulgora, it's about time we head to everyone's favourite planet, Gleba. My first act on this planet is of violence, as I destroy this little pentapod egg raft just to the south of my landing site. The pentapod eggs it drops are essential for crafting this planet's unique building, but spoil after 15 minutes into a live pentapod. Spoilage is the main mechanic on this planet, which makes it my most frustrating, but still favourite, planet, as all biological items have a spoilage timer from when they are made, which after it reaches 0 they turn into another item, usually spoilage. Up north I slay some more egg rafts, but also find some Yumiko trees, the first of the 2 important fruits this planet holds. Just like on Fulgora and Nauvis, the first thing I want to do is set down a landing pad, and set the logistics requests for Citron C1 to send down all the materials I'll need to get started. Then, after mining the other important fruit, Jelly Nut, I unlock this planet's unique building, the Biochamber, which is crafted using iron, green circuits, landfill, nutrients, and pentapod eggs. The nutrients can be made from spoilage or later on fruits, but pentapod eggs can only be acquired from killing pentapod nests and breeding the eggs in a biochamber. Quick side note, here's me setting up quality 3 modules on Fulgora. Each tier 3 module now takes a special item from a specific planet, and for quality, it's Superconductor from Fulgora. Back on Gleba, I'm using the biochamber to start processing Yumiko, which gives us 2 Yumiko mash each and a 2% chance of a seed. Since each plant you mine gives you 50 fruit, processing fruit by hand gives you on average the exact number of seeds you need to maintain production, assuming you process all fruits before they rot. But thanks to the 50% productivity bonus from biochambers, I actually get more seeds than I use, and so in theory can grow my harvest over time. You might notice that instead of electricity, biochambers are powered by consuming nutrients, which although rather annoying means that Gleba bases need very little electricity. Whilst out exploring, I ran headfirst into a pretty big pentapod nest, which ended predictably.
Oh my god. I love my life so much.
For those unfamiliar with the fauna of Gleba, the biggest creatures are stompers, which rely on stomping. The medium ones are strafers, which kind of run around you in a circle and shoot little wriggler projectiles at you. And the smallest ones are wrigglers, which are basically just reskinned biters with a bit more health. When I returned, most of the pentapods had moved back to their nest, and the one strafer that remained was quite easily dispatched with my machine gun. Back at base, I'm trying to do some bootleg egg breeding so that I can make enough biochambers to make a proper base. Eggs need 60 nutrients and some water to reproduce, which can only practically be fed by first processing jelly nut into jelly and Yumiko into mash, before combining that into bioflux, which can be turned into a lot of nutrients we can use to feed the egg breeding. Despite production not needing a lot of electricity, I'm going to have something else which will need a lot, so I'm printing down a nuclear reactor here on Gleba, which I'll just feed from Citron C1's fuel cell supply. The only resource patches on Gleba are stone, which is pretty useful because we're going to need a lot of landfill, so I set to work turning this entire patch into just landfill. It's time now to get into farming, so that I can start my real Gleba base. It's as simple as placing this agricultural tower near a patch of fertile soil, best identified by the fact it will already have fruit trees growing on it, and will be coloured a vibrant purple or green on the map, depending on which fruit it is you're trying to grow. All it needs is an input for seeds and output for fruit, and as long as it's powered it will automatically plant and harvest fruit trees on suitable ground around it. You can see that I'm just using red belts for sending seeds to the farms, since they don't spoil, but green belts for taking the fruits back from the farms, so that they spoil as little as possible before reaching the biochambers. Farming isn't all sunshine and daisies, however, as every time a fruit is harvested, it releases spores into the atmosphere, which, if they spread to a pentapod nest, will cause them to attack. It's essentially like pollution on Nauvis for biters. Thankfully though, these Tesla turrets we unlocked from Fulgora are pretty overpowered against pentapods, for reasons I'll explain when we see them in action later. They also take a whopping 1 megawatt of power just to idle, which is why we needed the nuclear power plant. This many might be a bit, get your bingo cards ready, overkill, but it's given me the confidence to put down the agricultural tower and actually start up our farming. The tower starts out clearing its area of random trees which aren't for fruit, so I stand here hoovering up the spoilage and wood that produces. But once the area is sufficiently clear, fruit starts to flow on the belt. I start up jelly nut just the same, and now I can set up the fruit processing in a central area. There are a few considerations with fruit processing, since I need 3 different outputs for the processed fruit, the seeds, and for spoilage, for anything that spoils whilst in the machine. Then when combining it into bioflux, I again need to account for any spoilage that needs pulling out. The nutrients for this base will be provided from bioflux, and carried around on a half of this belt, the other half reserved for spoilage, since anything which takes in nutrients will eventually produce spoilage. At the end of the fruit and nutrient/spoilage belts, I place down these heating towers which burn anything we throw into them. This not only destroys spoilage, but also stops highly rotten fruit from backing up on the belt, since most of the time the spoilage progress of ingredients is carried over to the products. Next up, I'm setting up my egg breeding, for which I'm using this little chest loop which is constantly breeding new eggs, so the old ones don't spoil and spawn pentapods. I don't have to worry about them backing up because I'll be constantly either using them up crafting agricultural science by combining them with bioflux, or burning them if I'm producing more than the science can consume. Agricultural science spoils just like everything else biological, so I don't need to worry about it backing up anyway, and most eggs will go into crafting that. I did make some poor design decisions which led to these horrible bioflux and nutrient belt shenanigans at the top, as well as me having to mix agricultural science onto the burn belt, and then separate it back out before it reaches the heating towers. I also placed biochamber production just off the burn belt, so that excess eggs that get sent away can be turned into biochambers instead of being destroyed. And to prevent eggs spoiling in the machine if backed up, I only input them when there are less than a set threshold of biochambers in the chest. Despite the main factory producing 0 spores and therefore not being a real target for the pentapods, I still place some Tesla turrets around the place in case either some eggs inadvertently hatch or an attack party paths through the base towards the farm they want to attack. I've finished research on something pretty cool which I'm forced to craft on Fulgora and then have Citron C1 express deliver to me. Whilst we wait for that, I'm combining Umicore seeds, nutrients and landfill to make artificial Umicore soil, which allows us to expand the growable area around the agricultural towers by placing it over the biome's fertile water. The same can be done with jelly nut. Very late game, we can also unlock overgrowth soil, which lets us plant Umicore and jelly nut anywhere in the green or purple biomes respectively. Back on Vulcanus, I set up a chest ready to accept agricultural science, just as soon as we start launching it, as well as a heating tower to burn any spoilage it produces. On Citron C1's next flyover of Gleba, it drops off materials to craft a rocket silo, as well as mech armour, which is that pretty cool thing I spoke about earlier. Not only does it have this humongous equipment grid, but also lets me fly over stuff. Very nice, and means I'm unlikely to be dying from any more pentapods, as my escape is far easier. I also now have a portable fission reactor instead of solar panels, so suit power is pretty much sorted going forward. I decide to dump bioflux into a provider chest along with the agri-science, because we're going to need to start exporting it to Nauvis eventually. The silo itself is going just above the incoming fruit belts. In retrospect, it probably would have been better to put it right next to the provider chests to reduce loading times for the limited bot network, but it's not the end of the world. Back on Vulcanus, I'm switching entirely to steam turbines, which make more efficient use of the 500 degree steam, meaning that the effective power output of those acid neutralization plants is more than triple. After another pass from Citron C1, I get a second rocket silo built. I also changed my colour to purple because the default browny orange colour is really boring. Something I neglected to do earlier was deal with overflow seeds, since with biochamber productivity we make 50% more seeds than we use. These would eventually back up, so I use a priority splitter to pull any overflow off the belt and feed it into a heating tower. My work on Gleba being essentially done, I jetted back up to Citron C1 to head to Fulgora. I decide to expand my quality module production whilst I'm here, including making quality red and blue circuit production. Despite Fulgora being arguably the home of quality, with the tier 3 module and recyclers being unlocked here, I can't help but think that due to most components coming already assembled, that it's not really suitable for my legendary factory in the future. I realised that I forgot to set up carbon fibre on Gleba before I left, so I do that now. It first requires carbon, which we can make in a biochamber using just spoilage as an ingredient. And then if we combine that with Umicore mash, we get carbon fibre. It's used in some important items later, as well as the new rocket turret I've researched with agricultural science. Rocket turrets are going to be important in the new space platform I've just sent up, Citron DS3. As you can see, I've saved no expense on the cargo hold on this thing. I really don't want to have to design a new Aquilo transfer ship for a long time. Just like Citron C1, it's going to be entirely nuclear powered, since as far out as Aquilo, solar has absolutely no chance at powering a decent size and speed ship. Whilst I wait for resources to accumulate to build DS3, I get back over to Gleba and expand the farms, since I don't seem to have built enough the first time around. I didn't just come here for that though, I also wanted to set up artillery, so that this base isn't susceptible to enemy expansions if we leave it working for a prolonged period of time. I manually target some nearby egg rafts outside of automatic targeting range, mostly because I want to really see the Tesla turrets in action. They do not disappoint, although this is a pretty small attack wave. I wonder how it would do against a slightly larger one. Well, lucky for you, I bit off what I thought in the moment was massively more than I could chew. This really could end up badly, because I'm counting at least 5 stompers there. My radars catch the swarm sneaking around the lake, closing in on the jelly nut farm where the artillery shots originated from. The thing that makes Tesla turrets so overpowered against pentapods is that it hits their head and each leg individually with its chained electricity, essentially meaning it does 6 times more damage to pentapods than regular enemies. That, along with the stun it causes which slows down the target, means they manage to handle the big swarm whilst taking minimal damage. You see, that's what I meant earlier when I said there was a canonical order to visit the planets. Because foundries from Vulcanus trivialise Holmium production on Fulgora, and Tesla turrets from Fulgora trivialise defence on Gleba. It just rhymes. On Nauvis I'm combining flying robot frames, steel, blue circuits and bioflux, all imported of course, to make capture rockets. A new type of ammo I just unlocked which I can fire at a nest to do this. Man-made horrors beyond our comprehension. That's right, we've captured a live biter spawner, and are now stealing biter eggs for our own nefarious purposes. Captive spawners consume 1 bioflux every minute, and if we don't provide this they start to take damage until they eventually break free and turn into a normal biter spawner. Our first nefarious purpose for biter eggs is to grow biolabs, massive clumps of mutated neural structure contained in a machine which can research with twice the efficiency of conventional labs. Basically, every technology costs half as many research packs if you're using biolabs. Biolabs do have 3 issues however. For the first 2, they use a lot of power, and they produce a lot of pollution, and with the high tier productivity modules we'll be putting into them, this issue will only be amplified. The third and even worse one, however, is the fact that with the biological component of the biolabs coming from Nauvis, it can only survive there, so if we want to make use of this boost, all produced science will need to be shipped to Nauvis. To remedy the first 2, I've added a nuclear power plant to solve the power issue, and Tesla turrets around the perimeter to help defend against encroaching roaches drawn in by the massive pollution cloud. Over on Vulcanus, I'm working on moving all of the science into provider chests so that it can be launched up to Citron C1 and over to Nauvis. It's a temporary solution. I think in the very final base I'll be forced to make every science I can on Nauvis for UPS and logistical reasons. I've also turned that captive nest into a productivity module free factory, since biter eggs are productivity module's special item. Eggs don't spoil whilst still in nests, so I just have a circuit that only inserts a single egg when all the other ingredients are present, to stop any getting stuck in the buffer and spoiling into live biters. Once the first few loads of science have arrived, research begins on the atomic bomb. I do try a bit of nest fighting without it, just using a handheld Tesla gun, but it takes forever just to kill one village. Once I get bored of killing nests the slow way, I start designing Citron DS3's production system, and get so caught up in it, I miss atomic bombs getting researched. For now. From Gleba, I got the Advanced Asteroid Processing recipe, which gives me improved thruster fuel recipes, so I don't need a ridiculous number of chemical plants solely dedicated to fuel and oxidizer production. The improved recipes require calcite, but rather than importing it all from Vulcanus, I can now get it from oxide asteroids using advanced oxide processing, along with a bit less ice than the normal recipe. There are advanced versions of both metallic and carbonic too, metallic giving copper, which won't be useful just yet, but carbonic giving sulfur, which you will soon see is very important for reaching Aquilo. Moving up from fuel production, I start on ammo production. I would recommend strongly against replicating anything you see me do on this platform. It's clunky, it's messy, and most of it didn't even work in this initial iteration. Like I was talking about a moment ago, sulfur is really important because we can combine it with carbon and water to make coal, and then combine that with more sulfur and more water to make explosives, which we need to make rockets, which are the only thing that can break up the big asteroids that we'll encounter on the way to Aquilo. For asteroid collection and reprocessing right at the front of the ship, I've copied the setup from Citroen C1, just with some added rocket turrets. On Citroen C1, I had walls on either side instead of defences, leading to a dozen or so destroyed warnings an hour as it catches stray asteroids. But on this ship, I'm forced to defend the sides because a little wall won't help against getting broadsided by a big asteroid. Of course, that's just half the ship, but I can copy and mirror the entire thing over to make it whole. Whilst I was waiting for that to build, I suddenly remembered that I have nukes now, so I go on a rampage to clear out biter nests so that our Biolab's pollution doesn't lead us to an untenable defensive situation. Even once DS3's construction is complete, it takes an ungodly amount of resources to fill the buffers to the point this Colossus can even move, which means even more waiting. It's so bad, I'm shipping ice from Fulgora on Citroen C1, and then sending it down to Vulcanus to be shipped up to get enough water into the fuel and reactor. With the bit of fuel this provides, I limp out of Vulcanus orbit towards Gleba, since interplanetary space contains far more resources to fill the buffers faster. Despite this, I soon find DS3 beached like a whale in space, slowly being pulled back towards Vulcanus and not much better off than it began. When it rains, it pours, however, and soon the great hulking platform has snowballed up to a decent speed, only increasing and with absolutely no defensive concerns to be heard of. And then, just as I'm getting confident in it and go AFK, it does this. As it turns out, I had neglected in multiple places to deal with the asteroid chunks that processing spits out. So in this instance, my iron plate, and therefore ammo production, was blocked with metallic asteroid chunks, and so I had to make this ugly inserter chain to throw them overboard. The best way to really test how well it will work is a trial by fire, so I send it straight off to Aquilo with me, all the items I need to get started, and very little faith in this platform's ability to keep me safe. Amazingly though, considering this is the first try, it's handling the asteroids really well, and is faster than the Aquilo ship I had in my original Space Age series. It soon drifts into orbit of the icy planet of Aquilo, and I can eject down to the surface to face the final, and most difficult of Space Age's 5 planets. Aquilo is covered in a sea of liquid ammonia, with only the occasional iceberg floating on its planet-spanning ocean. Mining these icy formations on the surface, I get ice platforms, which act as a landfill for this planet specifically, and lithium, which is this planet's unique resource and is important for a lot of endgame stuff. Most buildings cannot be built directly onto ice, needing some sort of insulator so that their heat doesn't melt it. So I place concrete down for me to place the landing pad on top of. Once my supplies have been sent down, I immediately place a nuclear reactor next to the landing pad. Nothing can function on Aquilo without external heat, so nuclear reactors and heating towers are essential in keeping any industry we have forward. I also brought solar panels? This might seem like an incredibly silly idea, with solar on Aquilo being 1% as effective as on Nauvis. But to use any other form of power, we need to first melt the ice into water, which, with each solar panel outputting only 600 watts, not kilowatts, watts of energy, it's a taller order than you might think. I prepare a power plant regardless, which due to even the turbines and 500-degree steam pipes needing heating for some reason, I need to design quite strangely to fit in the heat pipes. Forgetting I had some ice in my inventory already from mining the formations, I placed down a chemical plant to separate out the ammoniacal solution from the ocean into ammonia and ice. The ammonia will be important later. I'm then of course melting the ice in a chemical plant into water to feed into the heat exchangers. A few efficiency modules make it a bit less unbearably long, and once the first ice has been melted, I just need to wait until the reactor gets up to temperature so it can be boiled into steam. Whilst I wait for that to happen, I start spitballing a setup to separate ammoniacal solution into ammonia and ice, and then recombine without most of the ammonia to make ice platforms so we can expand our buildable area. We can combine the excess ammonia that's being pulled out with some of the crude oil which can also be found on Aquilo to make solid fuel, which by feeding into heating towers we can use to keep the whole build warm. Once it's up and running, that is. I'm just feeding them imported solid fuel for now. That pipe heading off to the east there is towards the crude oil deposit, where I end up placing a temporary heating tower just to speed up the heating process since it's so far away. As soon as the crude oil pipeline thaws, solid fuel starts producing and the setup can heat itself without external input. You can see I'm already starting work on another module since we will need a lot of ice platforms going forward, and every module we build makes it faster to build the next one. A sort of snowball effect, if you don't mind the pun. One problem that arises is that if we use more ammonia than is overflowing from the ice platform crafting, then the chemical plants separating the solution will back up on ice and stop completely. To fix this, I have to add these belts on the outside with inserters which remove ice from the chemical plants if it's backed up, so that we can continue making ammonia for more platforms and solid fuel. As far as getting rid of the ice goes, I'm first going to be turning it into water for the power plant, and if that backs up, I'm just going to recycle it into nothingness as soon as I get some recyclers delivered from Fulgora. We can actually go one step further with that solid fuel, as if we combine it with water and more ammonia, we get rocket fuel, which has a much higher fuel value and is therefore better fuel for the heating towers. It also means that when we get around to actually launching stuff later, I have one less thing to import. I'm not quite extracting ice as fast as I'd like, so I set up quality long inserters on Fulgora to be sent over once enough have accumulated. Since we're here, I might as well mention the quality EM plant setup you can see just there below it. I have them all set up until legendary quality, even though I can't actually make any legendaries until I get Aquilo's science pack, and only just got epic quality from Gleba's science pack. I now get back to expanding my tileable ice platform build. Due to an annoying quirk with copy pasting and offshore pumps, I have to copy the middle bit first and then the belts on the top and bottom afterwards. Once the first few are down, placing the rest is much faster, and by now we're producing a bit of excess rocket fuel and can send it down to heat up the power plant and hopefully wean the base off its reliance on nuclear fuel cells, although I won't delete the reactor in case the base has a cataclysmic failure. The way that I prioritise the heating towers over the nuclear reactor is that I have a circuit to only input fuel if it's below a certain temperature, and I set the threshold on the heating towers higher than the reactor, so the reactor only gets fuel if the heating towers aren't keeping up. It's not long before the ice platform unit is so large that I set up this pump to skim off excess ammonia to use in later processes we need for the science pack of this planet. It's not filling particularly fast for now, but once ice platforms back up, I'll have more ammonia than I'll know what to do with. I'm at the point now where I can make this planet's unique building, the cryo plant. If I smelt lithium in a furnace, I get lithium plate, and by combining that with reinforced concrete, superconductor, and blue circuits, I can craft a cryo plant. Unlike other unique buildings, it doesn't get a 50% productivity boost, but it does get 8 module slots to make up for that. Holmium is actually required in lithium production, so I upgraded my production on Fulgora using productivity 3 modules and speed beacons. Back to Aquilo, I designed this modular expandable setup for lithium which combines holmium plate, lithium brine and ammonia to make raw lithium, putting some in a provider chest to be available to the robot network and putting the rest onto a belt off to be used elsewhere. To heat it up, I have a belt of excess rocket fuel for my ice platform production, which I'm going to run to heat each individual production line. since that makes it easier to wake the base up if a cataclysm occurs without having to heat the entire thing up with imports. The lithium brine comes from pump jacks placed on those lithium brine fissures, which are to my knowledge wholly unique in being both a liquid and non-infinite. I was tempted to belt the Holmium over to the lithium build, but I decided to just use bots because we don't need it in massive amounts. Bots on Aquilo use 5 times as much power as on any other planet, so I am still going to minimise my use of bots going forward. The next thing we need to start producing is hot fluoroketone, essentially a coolant which is used in all of the low temperature recipes, as well as a certain new power source we're going to unlock on this planet. To craft it, we combine solid fuel, raw lithium, ammonia, and a new fluid called fluorine, which comes out of the ground like lithium brine, but is an infinite resource. The starter fluorine node we were given is absolutely pitiful, far from enough for the level of production we want, so I head out in search of a larger patch and pretty quickly find one. I go straight to set up 2 train stations down to the south, one to bring in this fluorine and another one to bring in more lithium brine, because I'm not sure the current patch will be enough and it will eventually run out. Whilst I wait for all the elevated rails and trains to be delivered from Vulcanus, I set up the pump jacks on the patch. The train itself will be 2-headed to save on rails and has 1 fluid wagon for the fluorine and 1 cargo wagon to bring rocket fuel to heat the outpost. The station at base pumps the fluorine out of the wagon and loads it up with rocket fuel from the heating belt. With hot fluoroketone finally producing, we can turn it into cold fluoroketone by just passing it through a cryogenic plant. You'll notice the pump on the hot tank to stop it filling right up. This is because most processes that use cold fluoroketone output hot fluoroketone, so I don't want their outputs being blocked by the freshly made stuff. It's the moment you've all been waiting for now. We have all the ingredients for the cryogenic science pack. It's crafted in a cryo plant by combining cold fluoroketone, ice and a lithium plate. Cryogenic plants have so many module slots I can put 2 speed 2 modules into it and still fit enough efficiency 2 modules in to bottom out its power usage. I'm just going to copy this build a few times to get us up to 60 science per minute. With great difficulty, I'm actually belting in the ice and lithium, as well as belting out the science which will be inserted directly into a silo, unlike the usual bot delivery from other planets. This is entirely to avoid the issue of bots draining the whole power grid every time DS3 passes overhead. If you directly insert items into a silo like this and untick the automatic requests thing, then they will be launched to any space platform that passes overhead which has a request for that item. To keep up with science production, I also have to expand the lithium build massively, which is easy since I made it modular. Increased lithium production means increased lithium brine consumption, so I set up a lithium brine outpost, and conveniently, the nearest patch is not too far to the south. It's not long after that Citron DS3 brings the first load of cryogenic science pack back to Nauvis, and I can begin research, starting with legendary quality, but changing halfway through to get the artificial biter spawner, before getting quantum processors, fusion power and railguns. Typically, I forgot to unpause OBS when building quantum processor production, but it's all bot fed anyway, and is crafted by combining blue circuits, tungsten carbide, superconductor, carbon fibre and lithium plate, as well as some cold fluoroketone which we get half of back as hot fluoroketone. I'm also setting up a little model for Aquilo's unique items, starting by combining 10 tungsten plate, 10 superconductor, 20 quantum processors and 10 cold fluoroketone into the handheld railgun, also known as the Demolisher Shitstomper 5000. Add carbon fibre to the mix and you get the railgun turret, which will be very important in any expeditions beyond Aquilo. Next up are the fusion reactor and fusion generator, which take a fuck ton of quantum processors, superconductor and tungsten plate, and are far and away the best power generator in the entire game, and I will be making extensive use of them going forward. As you can see, I've filled all of the slots in these cryo plants with quality modules to try and get the best quality that I can. The last thing I need to set up is barreled cold fluoroketone, for reasons I will explain later. Anyway, with my work on Aquilo done, I head back to Vulcanus because our rocket production needs a big boost, starting with blue circuits. I'm using epic quality EM plants which have been slowly accumulating on Fulgora, as they have 1.9 times the crafting speed for no extra power cost. Meanwhile on Aquilo, I'm setting up fusion power cells by combining a Holmium plate, 5 lithium plates and 100 ammonia. They contain 40 gigajoules of energy each, before any neighbour bonus from reactors. Back on Vulcanus, I set up plastic next using cryogenic plants to take advantage of the massive productivity boost 8 module slots can provide. I copied an entire half of my core liquefaction down here, along with upgrading to tier 3 productivity and speed modules to feed the plastic. It's probably overkill, but it means I can also send some of the excess petroleum over to the main base if required. I'm next looking at the iron and copper required to produce all of the circuits I want, but my power grid cries out in pain just looking at the requirements, so it's time to put some of that new tech to use. I start to design a fusion setup, which is a unique challenge due to how fusion power works. Each reactor takes in fusion power cells and cold fluoroketone, both of which I need to import from Aquilo, as well as 10 megawatts of power, and turns it into plasma, the temperature of which depends on how many neighbours it has. With each reactor having 2 neighbours, the plasma comes out at 3 million degrees, which is effectively 300 megawatts of power. Each generator turns 50 megawatts of plasma into 50 megawatts of power, and the same amount of hot fluoroketone as it took cold fluoroketone to make the plasma, meaning that once we get some fluoroketone into the system, we can recycle the same stuff forever. This is the design that I settle on. Usually, you need 1 cryo plant per reactor to keep it cooled, but with speed modules I get that down to 1 cryo plant per 2 reactors. One massive bonus of using fusion over fission is that the reactors only consume cells when they're producing plasma, like a burner entity consuming fuel, so they don't need any special circuitry to control fuel cell insertion. It's going to take a while for Aquilo to produce enough buildings to complete that reactor, so in the meantime I'm moving on to setting up molten metals for the circuit build. You'd be surprised how much lava you need to feed these heavily beaconed builds, and I'm sure I'll be even more shocked later on when I get around to using legendary buildings. With all the pipes set up, I'm ready to just connect up the belts and get producing circuits. It would probably be a bit more satisfying if I remembered to connect sulfuric acid first, but it did reveal that the green circuit machine is working far too fast for these 2 bulk inserters, so I double that up to 4. As soon as I connect that pipe up, the blue circuits start producing, and then I'm going to copy it 3 more times to get to the 1000 circuits a minute I wanted. That'll give us 20 rockets a minute before productivity, which after the advent of productivity 3 modules from Nauvis and rocket part productivity research using cryogenic science, will end up being more like 40 to 60 rockets a minute. 1000 LDS per minute is much simpler, and now all that's left is rocket fuel. For 1000 rocket fuel per minute, I'm making the slightly controversial move to go to Fulgora. Making it on Gleba from fruits or Aquilo from ammonia might be a better and more efficient idea, but I already have a massive amount of rocket launching infrastructure here, and the sandy ocean is literally made of heavy oil, so why not? I upgrade red and green science with yellow assemblers and speed modules, which should actually be enough to reach that 1000 eSPM target I'm aiming for this episode. The SPM figure I'm using is effective SPM, or eSPM as I've been calling it, which is how much research is done after productivity bonuses have been applied in the lab, rather than actual SPM, which is based on how many packs are crafted. As much as I would love to make 1 million packs a minute of each science pack, it's just not feasible with my, or indeed any current consumer, computer. As such, after Biolab's half science pack consumption, productivity-free modules, and a very overpowered research I'll talk about later, it shouldn't take more than about 300 actual science packs a minute to reach 1000 eSPM. We're off to Nauvis next, where I'm combining cold fluoroketone, capture rockets, uranium-235, and biter eggs to make artificial biter nests. It's really important that I only make as many as I need, because any that I leave in chests or in my inventory will spoil into a behemoth biter after half an hour. My first use for them is to make more eggs here to make more artificial nests, and I try to use a circuit condition which only inserts eggs when there is a request for the nests in the logistics network, so that none get left over, but I didn't know until now that you can't actually read requests to fulfill entity ghosts, so my plan won't really work. Annoying, but I can still do it manually whilst off planet, so it's not the end of the world. Anyway, what I really wanted them for was to make biter eggs available to space platforms, which I do safely by reading platform requests from the rocket silo, and only inserting eggs into the silo when one is overhead requesting them. Each nest can hold up to 100 eggs, so I place 5 nests around the silo, since each rocket can hold 500 eggs. On Aquilo, I set up the necessary amount of cryoscience production to reach 1000 eSPM, as well as making quantum processors available to rockets. For the most part, I'm not going to show me upgrading the Nauvis sciences, being those up to and including space science, since that's mostly just inserting modules, but I will show the process for the rest of the planetary sciences, such as on Fulgora, where ironically, after what I just said about the Nauvis sciences, most of what I needed to do was just putting modules and beacons around the existing build. Welcome to the world Citron C1 the second, because Citron C1 wasn't enough. Yes, it is a carbon copy, because the original is struggling to keep up with being both the MAL platform and the science delivery platform, so from now on, it'll just be the MAL platform, and Citron C1 the second will handle all of the science transport. I started building a slightly larger perimeter on Nauvis to give me a bit more room to build, but stopped halfway because I realised I didn't really have anything to fill it with yet. A red circuit shortage on Vulcanus prompted me to upgrade to using EM plants, which required some creative belt routing since they are a whole tile wider than the assembly machines which were there before. Metallurgic science was just another insert modules kind of deal, so the last planetary science I need to sort out is Gleba, which is definitely one of the hardest to scale, so much I'm deciding to just rebuild the process from scratch. It starts off with this little sushi loop that brings in the 2 fruits and turns them into bioflux, as well as dealing with any spoilage by turning it into nutrients. It reads the belts to only put up to a maximum amount of each item onto the belt, as to not clog it up, and I effectively prioritise the nutrients from spoilage over the nutrients from bioflux by just setting its nutrients on the belt limit higher. This then feeds into some egg breeders and science crafting biochambers like I've described previously. I was really happy with the build at this point until I realised how much work it needed to make it work well. Easily, my favourite little crafty trick I had to use was here, where to get the spoilage out of the science machines, which I had forgotten to account for previously, I used priority splitters and long-handed inserters to feed it out of the side of the machines. I wanted to keep this existing footprint, but unfortunately, I didn't really have any other way to get spoilage out of the egg labs, another complete oversight on my behalf, so I had to break out the top by 2 tiles. In retrospect, I might have been able to do something with long-handed inserters and that gap next to the egg inserters into the science biochambers, but it's too late now. The best part is, if I feel like I want more science production, I can just copy this entire module down, and after a bit of nursing it to life with nutrients and manually inserting eggs, it's ready to produce agri-science forever. This isn't free, of course. We need to input more fruit into the system by doing more farming. Most of the demand is on Umicore, so I've expanded that out to 4 towers, whereas the 2 we had for Jelly Nut will probably continue to be enough. So that's it then. All of the sciences up to about 250 packs per minute. But even after the Biolab and the productivity modules, that's going to give me like 600 eSPM, nowhere near the 1000 I want. Well, we have one more science pack which might help us in that department, and to that end, please welcome our newest space platform, Toyota Yaris. We're hitting the ground running by building another 1.4 gigawatt reactor, just like we had on Vulcanus, but this time it's uncommon quality, so we're actually getting 30% more power from it. To cool it, I've got 2 uncommon cryo plants, which again need 2 tier 3 speed modules to keep up with the 2 reactors each. I give the platform a modest cargo capacity, and then add these 2 cryo plants to craft the Prometheium science pack. I'll leave you in suspense about that for now, as first I want to design the thrust for the ship. This might seem like overkill, but to fit all of the production I need, I'm going to need a pretty wide platform. And as I said earlier, to get the fastest platform you need to have thrusters covering as much of the width of the platform as you can manage. Once it's fully speed moduled, which we can afford to do thanks to the massive fusion reactor, these 8 chemical plants will provide all of the fuel we need for that massive thruster array. Next up is asteroid processing. I'm using this design where the advanced processing is first and then is followed with the basic processing if the secondary item from advanced is backed up. This is much simpler than whatever the hell I was trying to do on DS3 and C1, and this time I also remembered to plan for feeding the asteroid chunk byproducts back into the input with priority. I made the same sort of thing for iron and copper processing. I've added enough crushers to not require any speed modules to produce enough for what I've calculated, so that if I have made any mistakes in my calculations, I can use the speed modules to make up the difference without having to do a massive redesign. I also decided to use stack inserters, which I unlocked on Gleba and allow you to stack up to 4 items on top of each other on belts to increase throughput and belt buffer storage on high demand items like iron by 4 times. Next up is carbonic processing, and for some reason I didn't use that good idea I had for the other 2, and subsequently will have to come back to fix it later. The design on the other 2 only works because the 2 products were put on separate sides of the belts immediately, meaning the primary product couldn't block the secondary from being produced, which prevented deadlocks and let the whole advanced processing priority deal work in the first place. Also, sorry to break the news, but unlike previous platforms, this one won't be symmetrical. That was just too difficult for my tiny little brain to figure out, whilst also trying to make a decently high throughput production line. Here's the ice melting, which, unlike on my previous nuclear powered platform, is really only used for fuel, oxidizer and explosives, which is why I'm getting it out of the way first. The process to turn carbon and sulfur into coal can only be done in chemical plants, but I can make the explosives in cryo plants, which saves a bit of space. We also only need copper to make copper cable for railgun ammo, so I got that out the way down here, and I can mix that onto a belt with the explosives, since they are both ingredients in railgun ammo. After a comical amount of iron plates and some steel plates, I'm ready to start making all the different ammos. Railgun ammo is made by combining steel plate, copper wire and explosives, and with a bit of belt splitting shenanigans I can bring the explosives together with iron to make rockets. Then of course all the rest of the iron plates are just turned into yellow ammo. Since we're producing copper anyway, we could technically use red ammo, but bullet DPS is the least of my concerns compared to the rockets and railguns, so it isn't really worth the extra complexity. The next part of the platform is going to be slightly controversial. You see, Prometheium science requires quantum processors, beta eggs, and something from beyond the edge of the star system, which only has a stack size of 1. The idea is that you're meant to get the eggs and then fly out to get the other thing before the eggs spoil after 30 minutes and make all the science whilst you're out there. Unfortunately for the devs, I'm like water and follow the path of least resistance, which to me is to just make these big belt tapestries to store thousands of the unstorable item and fly home with it, and then import the eggs directly from Nauvis and just make the science packs in its orbit before dropping them straight down to the surface. If you think that's cheating, all power to you, but I just see it as an effective exploitation of the game mechanics. Unfortunately, since the stack size of the item is only 1, I can't stack it with stack inserters, which would quadruple the storage capacity of this belt tapestry, which is already more than double the capacity of its equivalent in legendary cargo bays. Right at the front of the ship, I have a whopping 4 asteroid reprocessing setups, and have a defence consisting of a fuckton of gun turrets, a few rocket turrets, and the new fandangled railgun turrets. Predictably, the carbon processing is already starting to back up, so I upgrade it to the version I used for the other 2 resources. I also expanded my ice and calcite, because I had the room and somehow managed to catastrophically underbuild initially. The initial stress tests flying to Aquilo are promising. Promising meaning it did not even blink at the onslaught of big asteroids. Once at Aquilo, I got a ton of fusion cells sent up, and then it's time to begin the journey to the edge of the star system. These huge asteroids are the reason I needed the railguns to venture this far, as their massive 3000 flat defense means that only things that do more than 3000 physical damage can even hurt them, such as railgun shells. Railguns are great because they do collateral damage, meaning that when they fire at a target, they also hit everything between the end of the barrel and the target, and even a little bit past that. It's not long before I reach the solar system's edge, where I technically win the game, but we're not quite done yet. Past the edge, the only valid destination is the shattered planet, which is 4 million kilometers away, more than 200 times the distance from Nauvis to Vulcanus. Suffice to say, you aren't really meant to reach it, it's more just a target to fly towards whilst you gather what you're really here for, Prometheium asteroid chunks. Once past the solar system edge, you start to encounter Prometheium asteroids, which have twice the health of a normal asteroid, and we need to destroy to gather the Prometheium asteroid chunks. Rather than processing the chunks that we gather, we're actually going to use it as an ingredient in the Prometheium science pack. It's that difficult to start item I was talking about earlier. To make it this far out, I've had to slow down a lot just to let my turrets keep up with the asteroid killing, but that means it can take quite a while to gather a full load of Prometheium. Once I've got a decent load of chunks, I can turn around to start heading back to Nauvis. It's worth noting that since you collect Prometheium on the way there and on the way back, you should turn around when your storage is about halfway full, so that it'll be roughly full when you get back to the star system. I didn't get near half full this time, but that's just because it's a test run. Upon returning back to Nauvis, beta eggs are automatically sent up to the platform, and upon combining them with the Prometheium chunks and some quantum chips I picked up when I swung past Aquilo, we've got our first Prometheium science packs producing. You probably wonder why I care so much about Prometheium science packs, as it's only used in one technology, but that technology is an absolute doozy. It takes every single science pack in the game, and has double the research time of any other research, but in return gives us 10% extra productivity on research per level. That is an absolutely massive boost, and is how I'm planning to reach that 1000 eSPM threshold for this video's main target, and will be key in reaching the series goal of 1,000,000 eSPM. Running all science at scale revealed the biggest shortcoming to surprisingly be EM science, due to a scrap shortage, so I quickly ran around and set up a few scrap outposts. With that rectified, and after letting it run for an hour to get a good average, it's with great pleasure I can reveal I slightly overshot my eSPM target by 2.6 times. Very nice. I know an hour isn't a lot of time, and there still could be some sneaky buffers which haven't yet drained, but it's a good enough check for this episode, because I didn't want to wait around for 10 hours looking at the average, when this isn't nearly the final goal for the series. Unfortunately, that is all I have time for today. Next time, I'll be looking at a lot more quality, because that'll be essential to reaching our final goal. I hope you enjoyed, and if you wouldn't mind giving me a little algorithm boost by liking the video and subscribing, I would be very grateful. A special thanks to my Ko-Fi supporters for supporting me in making these videos. Stay silly.